Let's talk about Sudan, the country that has never known peace. But if you want to understand why, you need to go back to the time before Sudan even became a country. So for context, this is the big now Sudan before. It is bordered by Egypt to the north, Chad to the west, there's the Central African Republic to the southwest, and before it was split, there was Uganda to the bottom in the south, Kenya as well. It also borders Ethiopia to the east, and then it has the Red Sea as well. Now, Sudan was colonized by Britain through Egypt in the year 1899. Now, naturally, Sudan is divided into two. Due to the wetlands in the country, the northern part was mainly dominated by Arabs and Muslims, and these guys were actually already trading and doing business with the likes of Egypt, the likes of Middle East, and the southern part had the more African ethnicities such as the Dinkas, the Nur, the Acholi, Azande, and so many other tribes. So apparently slave trade was happening. But now, the British were using the elites in the north, the Arabs, to actually control the whole of what? Of Sudan. And a lot of slaves who were traded at the time, apparently they used to capture them from the southern part of Sudan. Now, rumors started spreading that Sudan was about to be given independence because, the British were like, we cannot do this anymore. Too much is going on here. And so, in the year 1955, in August, in the south, people heard that once Sudan gets independence, the positions that were being held by the British, governors or whatever, are going to be given to the elite Arabs in the north. And so the southern people felt, no, we are being neglected. We were promised representation. We were promised things. And they're not giving us anything. And so even before independence in August 1955, war broke out in Sudan. And in the year 1956, January, the British were like, bye-bye, you guys, we can no longer handle it. They gave Sudan its independence. You're following. Now, conflict continued, and in the year 1958, a general known as Ibrahim Abdoud seized power. However, the following year, in 1963, the southern people organized what is known as the Armed South Resistance, known as the Anyanya, to mean venom snake, because like I told you, they had heard that power had been given to the elite politicians, the Arabs in the north. But also in the north, there are problems because in the year 1964, the civilians protested and they forced out this general known as Ibrahim in what was known as the October Revolution. Now, after the civilians chased him away, in the year 1969, a young army colonel known as Jafar Nimeri, I don't know if I've pronounced that right, he took over power through a military coup. And I need you guys to remember that name. Okay, I'm going to keep calling him Jafar. And this guy stayed in power, and there was at least some peace for at least a decade. You're following what I'm telling you. So, when he took power, he signed what is known as the Addis Ababa Agreement. And in this agreement, they agreed to incorporate the southern soldiers into the National Guard, to give regional autonomy to the south, and to give them a separate assembly or parliament so that they can have their own laws, their own way of doing things. You understand what's going on? And for a decade, things were okay. Until, like I told you guys, oil is a curse, because in the year 1970, they discovered oil in Sudan. But the challenge was, it was in the southern part of Sudan. Jesus Christ! When oil was discovered, the central government, which is based in Khartoum, definitely decided that the pipelines would flow north, the oil would flow north, the refinery would be north, and the money would come to them. It was up to them to decide if they were going to give the southern people a piece of it or not. And this guy who had signed the Addis Ababa Agreement, Jaffa, went against it and imposed the Sharia law on the whole country. Now, I forgot to tell you guys, because the north was mainly Arabs and Muslims, it was mainly Islam up there. Down here, where more African ethnicities were, it was dominated by the African traditional society and also Christianity. Now, the southern people were like, this is not fair at all. How could you do this and go against your own agreement? And so in the south, they were cooking. And they brought a gentleman known as John Garang. He had studied in the United States and he had a PhD in agriculture economics. And this guy, he brought people together and formed what is known as the Sudan People's Liberation Army. And these guys were here to be like, you can't play with the South like that. Now, the Second Sudan Civil War broke out. And it lasted 22 years. Oh my God. 2 million people were killed, either by famine or diseases. 4 million people were displaced. But in the year 1985, Jaffa was overthrown by Omar al-Bashir, who was backed by Islamists movement, which was known as the National Islamist Front. And then at the time, Sudan started hosting so many international terrorists. Apparently, Bin Laden was there between 1991 up to 1996. And then the US got interested after 9/11. They were like, no, we gotta look into Sudan. So they also imposed sanctions on Sudan, and the economy, crippled. And so these guys were like, no, enough is enough. In January of 2005, an agreement known as the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed in Nairobi to bring peace to Sudan. And in this agreement, they gave South Sudan some of the revenue from the oil. They promised them like a referendum to independence in the next 6 years, but they were given autonomy right now. And then at the same time, they made John Garang the first vice president of Sudan. So he flew into Khartoum and he was welcomed by millions of people all over the streets. But to their shock, 21 days later, John Garang went to Uganda for a meeting. And apparently, his helicopter crashed as he was coming back, flying between Uganda and Southern Sudan. Now, part 2, so that I tell you the gist of it.